All right, so we alluded to several of these things in our last unit when we talked about election laws, but we want to really focus in on this idea of why we're a two-party system. And sometimes, in order to understand that, you have to also kind of understand a multi-party system and see how they function differently. So make sure you're really listening to that because there's some important concepts in here. Part of the reason we're a two-party system is because we've always been a two-party system. And I know that that sounds kind of silly, but from the very beginning, we've kind of been split into this for or against kind of debate. What were our first two parties? Yeah. I mean, from the very beginning, it's always been kind of that. And I think it's human nature, too, to be kind of this yin and yang of, like, this party or that party. So that's a big part of it. If family is the greatest agent of political socialization and our parents know the two-party system, then they continue to socialize us that way. And so we're brought up in this system of this or that. You know, I mean, I can't tell you how often my kids will say, no, what are we, or what party are we? And I'm like, you know, I try really hard not to tell them that we are a party. But at the end of the day, it just gets passed on to you. And so even though the parties evolve and change, we're still in that just two-party kind of idea. This one and this one are the biggest reasons. That winner-take-all feature of the Electoral College, remember we looked in the last unit how that marginalizes third-party candidates. Because the winner-take-all feature of the Electoral College keeps third-party candidates from probably ever winning the most in any given state. They don't win the most because they don't have as much money. They don't have as much media attention. So as a result then, they don't get the most, they don't ever get any electoral votes. Single-member districts is the same concept, but it applies to the legislature. So I'm going to draw you a little map and show you what it looks like, but you can't judge my map, okay? All right, and I'll put this back up there in just a second. Okay, so if you think about a state. Okay, so let's say this is your state, okay? It's a pretty shape, isn't it? So, and the state is going to be broken into all these different legislative districts. And each legislative district is supposed to be, I know it's not pretty, each legislative district is supposed to be about equal in population, not size necessarily, but about the same amount of people. So when we go to have elections specifically for the House of Representatives, okay, every one of these legislative districts, 435 total, are going to end up choosing one person to go and be in the House of Representatives. So when you guys go and vote on your ballot in November, you're going to have a Republican. It'll be Sam Johnson because he's our incumbent, and so he'll certainly get the primary. He'll certainly win in his party. Then you're going to have a Democrat who will never win in our district. And then you're going to have a Libertarian. And just like with the winner-take-all feature when we go to elect for president, the same thing's going to happen. We're going to have popular vote for each of those. And the Libertarian candidate will probably get a pretty big chunk. The Democrat might likely get 30%, maybe even 40% potentially. But the likelihood that the Republican doesn't get the most is very, very slim. That means that we'll elect one person to go to the House of Representatives. And so when we talk about all those people in the House of Representatives, and I told you they're all Republican or Democrat, that's why. Because we have people that go in and vote straight party. We have people that vote based on name recognition. So single-member districts marginalize third parties in the legislature, just like winner-take-all feature marginalizes third-party presidential candidates or candidates for the presidency. Okay? Let me show you the opposite way of this so that you understand, because the opposite way is really important. Okay? So again, this time we'll have a square state because y'all made faces at my state. And then we're split into sections, and we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're total 12 representatives for this district, for this state. So we'll do one person for each of these, but we've still got 3 remaining. So for those remaining 3, we're going to look at proportion of the vote. And so let's say that in each of these districts we had multiple parties running, and that overall in the state, the red party got 40% of the vote, and the blue party got 30%, and the green party got 20%, then what we're going to do with those remaining 3 is we're going to figure this out, which means that that green party might actually get a percentage of the vote. So when you look at states nations like maybe like Israel or France, where they end up having multiple parties in their legislature, it's because they use proportional systems instead of single member systems. Have you ever heard of something called an at-large election? Sometimes cities will do that. So what they'll do is, if you take the city of Frisco, we elect people for the city council. That doesn't mean, like, if your city does it at large, that means they don't divide the city up. They just have 5 people on the city council. When a person's term expires, everybody in the city gets to vote for every one of the positions. You don't vote just for the one to represent you. So if your city does that, and then they do it based on percentage, you're going to find that you're going to have more political parties, because you're not marginalizing those little guys anymore, you're giving them a chance. So they're competing in the whole group instead of individually. Kristen, you keep making a face, and I can't decide if it's not making sense.
It makes sense. It's just my intense thinking.
But you are, okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Is this making sense, what I'm saying? Okay. One more thing we're going to talk about this with then. Let's pretend that America was a multi-party system. Let's pretend that our laws were different, and in our legislature, we end up having all these different parties represented. And so let's say that we have the leftist party, and we have the caribou party, and we have the banana party. And of all of the seats in the legislature, let's say that the banana party ends up with 45% of the seats total, and that the caribou party has 20%, and that the leftist has, is it 35 left? Okay. Okay, so here's the deal. If you require a majority for passing laws, or you require a majority for any kind of action, you have a really hard time, because nobody has a majority. So what do you think this government would have to do in order for them to accomplish any kind of legislative change?
Plurality.
They would have to go to a plurality, absolutely. And so they could do a plurality system. But let's divide this even more. Let's say we have a banana party that has only 20%, and then we've got a cherry party that has 25%. So we have a real problem, right? So what would this government have to do in order for anybody to be in control?
Work together.
They have to work together. So we call that forming coalitions. So a coalition means that we're going to have parties that are going to band together. So you're going to band with the people who are most similar to you, which means that you're going to have the left of the political spectrum and the right of the political spectrum. It has an active communist party. They have an active socialist party. Never does either party win a majority of the vote. But they like each other more than the conservative people, so they band together, look for their commonalities, and it becomes a coalition government. So whereas our parties are really broad, and they appeal to all of the people on the left or all the people on the right, multi-party systems, all they do is acknowledge the factions within them, but they still end up having to band together, or they don't accomplish anything. So if you have a multi-party system, the thing is, you can take a more distinct position. You know, like if you, okay, let's look at the Democrats right now. You got Clinton that's kind of over here, and then you've got Sanders that's kind of over here, right? So the party's going to have to join together, but what multi-party systems allow you to do is you can make more distinct positions. But then, once they get into government, they have to form a coalition if they want to join together and do anything. Are all these looks processing, or is it just you're waiting for the bell to ring? I can't tell. Okay. I think this is so interesting. So, anyway. Okay. All right. The last thing is this last bullet here. We have a lot of laws within our states that favor traditional parties. So an example that I can think of is it's fairly difficult to get your name on a ballot. So when you went and you voted, like you had all of those candidates, so they had followed like all the procedures that they needed to get their name on the ballot. But let's say that I decide, you know what, I really want to run for governor in the state of Texas, and I'm just going to run as an independent. I'm required to have 50,000 signatures of registered voters before the state of Texas would even let my name on the ballot. But the Republican and Democrats, because they're part of established parties, it's kind of different. And most states have laws like that, where they just make it, because the Republican and Democrats have a primary, or they have a caucus, they have this vetting process, but independents are guys like these nuts. I mean, it's just like those kind of people that are just gonna, like, get out there. So most states make it a lot harder, and so the laws favor. So are we a two-party system because of ideology, or are we a two-party system because of our infrastructure? Absolutely. The systems that we have put in place foster us being a two-party system, which means that our parties have to be a lot broader to try to appeal to the masses. Okay? I think that is an excellent place to stop.